I'll talk about the future potential impact of AI and the potential impact on society, but also on us, on people. So there's a big question, which is AI going to be good for society? Is it going to be good for democracy? Is it going to be good for people, for work, for the economy? And the answer to this depends on how it's used. So AI is a tool. Tools give us power. And this power can be used for good things or bad things. And so the question is, how are we going to guarantee or harness the power of AI for the good of society? And perhaps we should start by trying to figure out what AI can do today. Okay, so today, AI can be used for, traditionally, it's been used for things like computer vision, getting machines to be able to see, understand images, understand video. For speech recognition, we can talk to our phones now, we can talk to, our various assistants. And to some extent, they understand what we say, not entirely, but that's another area of AI, which is natural language understanding. Another area of AI is not for interpreting data, but for producing it. So for things like image synthesis or video synthesis, for art, for text generation. And this poses some questions as to how that can be used. It can be used, again, for good or for bad. It can be used for art, but it can also be used for fake news and things of that type. So most of the uses of AI today, though, are pretty positive, in fact, very positive. So the best use, the one that concerns most of us, that is kind of more visible, is in transportation. Almost all the cars that come out today come out with some sort of driving assistance system. It's a little camera that looks out through the windshield, and the car will not necessarily drive automatically, but at least it will brake automatically when an obstacle comes in front of your car. And those systems use AI. They use deep learning. They use the techniques that were developed in the last 10 years or so. Those things reduce collisions by about 40%. So they save lives. Another area where AI is being deployed very widely today is medicine, particularly medical image analysis. So again, this is AI saving lives by essentially helping radiologists detect tumors in mammograms, for example, or prostate or other ailments. And it's also being used for things like drug discovery. So there's not been any big win yet in that domain, but it's a very active area of research of using AI to predict what the effect of a particular chemical compound will be, and thereby kind of imagine new compounds that can cure disease that currently cannot be cured. There's a lot of uses of AI in environmental monitoring as well, either from satellite imaging or aerial images, but also for things like we can identify individual animals like whales, for example. You can recognize a whale, it turns out, by just the shape of its tail. So take a picture of a whale, you're doing whale watching, you take a picture, you can upload it on, I think it's called Whale Book or something like that. And it will tell you this is Robert, okay? It's easy to do this with current technology. And of course, a lot of applications that are kind of behind the scenes in things like manufacturing, process control, and things like that. But really, the main thing that AI is used for today is connecting people with each other and connecting people with knowledge or information. So, we all use some form of social network or some form of online forum of some type, or at least we use search engines. All of those systems use modern AI to decide what piece of content to show you, and more importantly, what piece of content to not show you. So we are bombarded with enormous amounts of information every day, and we cannot deal with the information deluge. So we have to use AI to basically pick out content that is most likely to be of interest to us, or most likely to be educational or entertaining or whatever it is. And we have no choice to some extent because there is so much information we could have access to that we need the help of automated system to be able to sift through that for us. And this is not going to go away. This is going to get worse, or better if you want. Worse because the amount of information generated by society grows exponentially, but better because AI systems are getting better and better at picking that information. So if you take all the big tech companies today, the Meta, which means Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc., Google, including YouTube, Amazon, all of those systems, if you take modern AI out of those companies, they literally crumble. They are entirely built around it. And it's only happened in the last 7 or 8 years or so. And so it's a fairly recent phenomenon. And all of those companies are learning how to use those technologies. And it doesn't always work perfectly. So one thing that certainly AI has helped us do is connect people with each other. So in the last few years, there's been a huge amount of progress in language translation. We have now automated systems that can translate several hundred languages from any of those several hundred to any other of those several hundreds with a single machine learning system. It's a single AI system, which to some extent has superhuman performance because it can translate from any pair of language, essentially. And it doesn't require a lot of data to learn to translate a new language because languages are very similar to each other in many ways. And those systems can exploit the redundancy in the data to basically learn a new language with very little effort, very little data. So we have now systems that can do natural language understanding in hundreds of languages, translation in hundreds of languages, speech recognition in hundreds of languages, all requiring a relatively small amount of data. Now, this is very useful because a lot of people in the world do not actually have all access to information, either because they don't speak one of the dominant languages that is used by technological widgets today. There's basically 3 billion people in the world who cannot use technology today, mostly because they don't have access to the internet. Most people can actually get smartphones, strangely enough. But 800 million people in the world are illiterate. And for them to use technology, it means using speech, not using text. 300 million are visually impaired. And it's the same thing. They have to use speech as a way of interaction. They cannot use text and sort of classical interfaces. And so to erase or lower cultural barriers, being able to translate, I think, is very important. So, but content moderation comes with a lot of complications. And in particular, let's say you are a social network like Facebook or Twitter or one of those. You have to do content moderation on an enormous scale. And content moderation is necessary. It's not that those companies actually want to do content moderation. It's that they've been pushed into doing it. In fact, when I joined, at the time it was called Facebook in 2013, there was a relatively small amount of automated content moderation on Facebook. But as the year passed, Facebook had to implement more and more content moderation systems because the platform had become essentially a battleground for all kinds of people and organizations who wanted to influence others, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in very nefarious ways. So, you have to do content moderation to protect people's safety. Calls to violence, for example, have to be taken down, or things that kind of favor ethnic or religious conflicts or things like that, which has happened on social networks in the past. So let me tell you a story. Several years ago, people in Myanmar started having access to the internet and started buying smartphones. And one of the first things they did is install Facebook. They didn't have to talk to Facebook for this. Facebook didn't have to decide to deploy in Myanmar. People just spontaneously installed Facebook, right? And that became kind of the default platform of the internet in Myanmar. Now, in Myanmar, there are ethnic and religious conflicts, right? The Rohingyas is a Muslim minority, and the Buddhist majority has been in conflict with them. And there were people who were, essentially inciting others to commit violent acts against the other community. And Facebook didn't know about it. It didn't know about it because Facebook didn't have any automated system that could understand Burmese at the time. And also didn't have any content moderators that spoke Burmese because, Facebook was completely new in Myanmar. And so people started to basically incite each other to kill each other on Facebook. So what did Facebook do? First, they hired people who spoke Burmese, but not enough and not quickly enough. So the second thing they did is the research lab built the best Burmese to English translation system. It's the best in the world. We know it's the best in the world because we tested it against others in a competition. And that was used to basically translate posts into English so that English content moderators and English hate speech detectors could work. But that was very far from perfect. So what happened eventually is there was enough data that we could train AI systems to do content moderation directly in Burmese. All of this took enormous amounts of efforts, money, and time. And in the meantime, people were killing each other, which is horrible. But this is one of the problems you have to face when you run a network of this type. And those things happen all the time. Similarly, in all kinds of countries, there are foreign countries that try to influence elections in those countries or somehow corrupt the democratic process. And the only way to do this at scale quickly enough is to actually use AI to detect hate speech, misinformation, and attempts to corrupt the electoral and democratic system. It's a moving target because it's a game of cat and mouse. So filtering objectionable content is a necessity, and it's a necessity to protect democracy. It's not just a matter of making sure people are safe when they use an online system. It also has important consequences for society. So Meta has very large organizations internally that actually are entirely devoted to this problem. It's called integrity, of ensuring that objectionable content is taken down and ensuring that attacks on the integrity and privacy of users are corrected. And it's never perfect. You probably heard a few scandals and stories. Some of them are true, and it's because nothing is perfect. So let me give you a few numbers. So first of all, networks like Facebook have asked governments of liberal democracies around the world for regulation of contents, for guidelines about what should constitute acceptable contents or objectionable content online, because Facebook doesn't see itself as having the legitimacy to decide that for people. It's not a good idea to have a large American private company decide what content is appropriate or not. So Facebook said, we don't want to decide that. We want governments to tell us what is appropriate. And the problem is that governments haven't done it. At least the American government hasn't. The French government actually has held discussions with Facebook about those questions. But in the absence of regulation, which were requested by Facebook, Facebook had to basically set its own standards. What constitutes hate speech? What constitutes incitements to violence? What constitutes violent content? What constitutes bullying, harassment, child endangerment, suicide and self-injury, advocacy, nudity, terrorist propaganda, fake accounts, spam, all that stuff, right? So today, AI systems take down 95.6% of hate speech on Facebook. Okay, so for every piece of hate speech that is posted on Facebook, 95.6% is taken down automatically by AI system before anyone sees it. The remaining 4.4% are flagged by users and then examined by human moderators and then taken down. Okay? Now, of course, there's a question of how you define hate speech, right? Which is a policy question. It's not a technological question. So you have to answer the policy question first, and then implement the technology that can enforce those policies. As a result, the prevalence of hateful content on Facebook is 0.02%. So take a random piece of content that people see, 0.02% of that could be qualified as hateful content. For incitement to violence, so calls to violence and things like that, 98.1% is taken down automatically by AI systems. And the prevalence of this kind of content is 0.03%. For violent content, so things where people are beating each other or hurting each other, is 99.5%. That's actually easier to detect. Some of it go through, but most of it is taken down before anybody gets to see it. Bullying, harassment, that's not nearly as good. It's only 67% because it's harder to detect. Child endangerment is 96.4. Suicide and self-injury is 98.8. Nudity is 96.7. Terrorism, the number is low, so it's not a percentage. It's 16 million pieces of terrorist propaganda are taken down automatically by AI systems, preemptively. 1.5 billion fake accounts, 1.8 billion pieces of spam. That's per quarter, okay? That's per periods of 3 months. Now, if we were to go back 3 or 4 years ago, and I had to give you those numbers, they would not be nearly as good. The percentage of hate speech that was taken down automatically by Facebook 4 years ago was something like 30 or 40%. But because of breakthrough progress in AI over the last few years, those numbers now are in the upper 90s, okay? So I'm not saying that AI is the ultimate solution to basically online integrity and protecting liberal democracy and things like that. But it's making a huge amount of progress and it's helping a lot. Now, if you look at which countries in the world take down Facebook, okay? They are not democratic countries. They're countries like China, like North Korea, Iran, and occasionally Turkey when the government is not happy with their own people. So Facebook and other social networks are actually used by popular movements, and authoritarian governments don't like it at all. Russia took down Facebook since the invasion of Ukraine to prevent people from basically accessing contrary information. Facebook was essentially tagging every piece of information from the Russian government as being misinformation or doubtful. And so the Russian government asked Facebook to stop doing it, and Facebook said, we won't stop. And so as a result, Russia blocked Facebook from being accessible in Russia, a bit like China. So there are moral questions in the deployment of AI systems. And some of them are simple to answer, but most of them are trade-offs. So how do you trade free speech with content moderation? It's good to do content moderation, but up to a point. After a point, you kind of start taking down content that is perfectly legitimate. Those are false positive detection of hate speech by those systems. And where to put the trade-off. It's not an easy question. There's no simple answer to this. And it's even less simple because it's used as a battleground for politics. So whenever there is an issue that has two sides, social networks have become the battleground for discussing those issues. And what's interesting is that both sides of the issue is very often absolutely convinced that Facebook favors the other side because they only see their piece of content being taken down and not the other ones. But in fact, Facebook is very, very, very careful to not actually take side in legitimate debates, unless the discourse goes into calls to violence and things like that. Which is why, for example, after the events of January 6th in the US, Facebook decided to deplatform Donald Trump. Okay, but then there are other questions of AI that have nothing to do with, online content necessarily. So we have very powerful computer vision systems now, and to some extent I'm very proud of this because a lot of those systems actually use an invention I made many years ago when I was working at Bell Labs, over 30 years ago, called convolutional nets. Those are universally used for those systems I was telling you about, for medical imaging, for automatic braking systems for cars, self-driving cars, etc. They all use those techniques. Wonderful use. Environmental protection, all that stuff. They're also used for massive face recognition and basically surveillance by some government, including China. And that's not a good use of that technology, at least for people who believe in principles of liberal democracy. It's the same technology. Those technologies can be used for weapons, smart weapons, or autonomous weapons. Now, autonomous weapons have been around for a very long time. The first autonomous weapon is the landmine. And landmines are dangerous, in fact, are banned by most countries with a treaty, not signed by the United States. And they're banned because they're autonomous, and they're not banned because they are intelligent, they're banned because they're stupid. They will blow up, anybody who step on them, friend or foe, civilian or military. So it's their stupidity that makes them dangerous, or immoral, really. So let's imagine we have intelligent systems that can do face recognition, so they can target an individual, as opposed to just drop a big bomb on a building and kill everyone inside. Is that good or bad? That's a moral question. Is it a good or bad thing? It's good, perhaps, if it's in the hands of a democratic government. Probably bad if it's not. But what we need, there's big limitations to current AI technology. It's called AI, but it's not that intelligent in the end. It all uses a technique called supervised learning, which has very dire limitations. And so what we want in the future of our AI systems are things like completely autonomous driving. It would be nice if we had that. We don't have it at the moment. It's going to come in the next few years, but it's harder than some of the people who started working on this advertised. Some people like me knew this was hard, this was not going to come very quickly, but when you have to kind of promise something, you tend to be a little more optimistic. The second thing we want is things like domestic robots. A robot that just takes care of everything in our house, right? Save us time. And then the last thing we might want is intelligent virtual assistants that help us in our daily lives. So today, all of us here are carrying a smartphone in our pockets. 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, we're not going to have smartphones anymore. We're going to have augmented reality glasses. Okay, so the computer will still be in our pocket, but we'll talk to our glasses. Our glasses will display content that will be overlaid over the real world. So if you go to a foreign country, you don't speak the language, you see a sign, the sign will be translated automatically and displayed in your augmented reality glasses. You talk to someone, and that person doesn't understand the language you speak, the translation will be displayed in their glasses, and when they speak to you, a translation will be displayed in your glasses. You'll cross the street, and your glasses will alert you if a car is coming in that you didn't see. So there's going to be a lot of things like that, and the way you will interact with those virtual assistants is that you'll interact through speech. Your assistant will know everything you do, so we'll have a lot of context about what you might want, might predict actually ahead what you might want. And then the kind of interaction you will have with it is that you'll wear bracelets that detect myoelectric currents from your arms, and you'll be able to basically have your hands in your pocket and type if you want to type, if you don't want to speak. Now, those assistants will be under control and basically filter all of our information, diet, and help us in our daily lives like a human assistant could do today. And there's a big question of how precisely to do this. So we don't have the technology for this today in the sense that we don't have machines that are smart enough to really understand how the world works. And so we're going to need to make a lot of progress, technological and scientific progress, to get machines to learn like humans and like animals. We don't have self-driving cars today, even by trying to train those machines for millions of hours to try to drive cars. But how is it that most teenagers can learn to drive a car in about 20 hours of practice with hardly any supervision? So obviously, our current AI systems are missing something really big that the human brain and animal brains actually can do in terms of learning. And we're working to discover what this is. And once we do, we're going to have sort of a new era of intelligent systems. Thank you.